And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the bigger picture.
Evening.
Good evening. Good
Evening.
evening, everybody.
Fantastic. We have got a wonderful live virtual studio audience over here on the Bushy Shore Zoom channel. So do come and join us quickly, because that is where the action is. That is the best place to engage with this class. So a warm welcome to everybody watching on Zoom. A warm welcome to everybody watching on Facebook and on YouTube. We have got a really fantastic class coming up this evening, I hope. I mean, the material is fantastic. One can only hope that I can deliver it in a fantastic way. So you guys will be the judge of that. Let's, for now, crack up. Let's not crack up. Let's crack on with the slideshow. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be delving into the world of life in the Garden of Eden and free will. That is what we're going to be dealing with tonight, all being well. So lots of fantastic stuff. Can I just have some thumbs up on the screen if you can see that slideshow? Good stuff. So here we go. Week 3 of Parashat Bereishit, exploring the Garden of Eden and free will. Let's just recap a little bit on some of the things we talked about. Oh, I'll take that one away. Oh, sneaky. Let's first of all recap with the structure of Parashat Bereishit. Audience participation. You've seen the first one. Okay, we broke down Parashat Bereishit into several sections. Let's just recap for all those tuning in on Zoom and for all those tuning in on the recording. What do we cover in Parashat Bereishit? How do we break it down? Who can help us out?
Creation.
Thank you very much. Look at that, Kathy. Creation of the world. That's right. Next.
Life in Eden.
The Garden of Eden. Thank you, Lee.
And
Is
life.
Candy, by the way,
Cain and Abel.
the PDF handout or
Cain and Abel. Cain and
Abel. Thank you very much. And then the final piece to Parashat Bereishit.
The generations.
The generations, yeah.
The 10 generations between Adam and Noah. So hopefully you guys have got the PDF handout that I circulated. And if not, we're going to be showing some of the pages up on the screen tonight as we delve a little bit more into the actual text of the parasha. So that's our structure. That's very good. And then we were, just to recap a little bit on what we were talking about last week, we were talking about creation as being a process of 7. There are 7 days to the story of creation, but we broke it down to the 6 days of productivity leading into a 7th. So there were 6 stages, and that led to the 7th stage, which we said was a reality of reflection, a reality of rest, coming to a place of perfection and completion, the perfect reality. We said that at the end of day 6, Hashem tells us that what he has created is Tov Ma'od. It was very good. And that was the end of the first presentation of creation. And that was some of the things that we talked about last week. If you're unfamiliar, the recordings are still on the Shul YouTube channel, so you can catch up there. So tonight we're going to be transitioning into the next part of the story of the Garden of Eden, the sin of Adam and Chava. That's what we're going to be tackling in the next couple of chapters, chapter 2 and chapter 3. And we pointed out at the end of last week's session, preparing us for tonight's session, that on a simple level, if we read through the flow of the parasha, so we are tempted to think that the story of the Garden of Eden takes place after the days of creation. But then we explored some sources and we talked about how actually the story of the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve and the tree, that's all taking place when? On?
Day 6.
Day 6. That's all taking place on day 6. And that led us to ask a couple of questions. Number one, it led us to ask why we have two presentations of the story of creation. We have chapter 1, which is the first presentation, and then we have an almost second, well, we do have a second presentation of the story. So we asked ourselves, why is there not just one? Why is the story of Adam and Eve not included in this first presentation, in the original presentation? Why is it that we have all of creation and then we go back and we delve into this little episode?
Put it out.
Pardon me? It's all hypothetical, all rhetorical at the moment, Martin.
Rabbi, Nick, can I just pick up something before you go on, please?
I really, really wanted to try and just try and get this piece done.
It's just pertaining to what you said just now.
Yeah.
The last one was when the sin was created, because you missed it out last week. The sin was created on day 6.
Yeah.
And after the sin was created, you told us that Hashem said, Tov Ma'od.
No. I said that Hashem reflects on day 6, Tov Ma'od, and then we would be having the story.
But the story occurred on day 6 and Hashem said it afterwards.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Whatever it means that Hashem said something, I think he's talking about the creation of everything that took place on day 6 before leading into this story. I don't think we were saying that it was happening. Oh, am I losing everyone? What's going on? Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Can everyone still see me?
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Okay. I've just lost you guys. If you just give me a second. Sorry, everyone. You've disappeared. I just want to get you back. Oh. There you are. Lovely. So yes, that's what we had said. We hadn't said that he was saying Tov Ma'od after the sin. Whatever it means for Hashem to have said Tov Ma'od, that's happening before the sin. Okay, so we had said, why does it need to be split into 2 different stories? That was number 1. And number 2, if we're saying that it's taking place on day 6, the period of a creative process, then logic would lead us to conclude that there is something that is being created through the story of the Garden of Eden. And that it's not just a story about downfall, it's not just a story about the sin, but it exists within the context of the Sheishes Yimei Bereishit, of the 6 days of creation, and therefore there must be something that is being created. So we're going to take a little look at what is being created, because it would seem to be more than just the downfall of man. And we're going to try and reconcile this tension of, on the one hand, the episode talking about the downfall of man, while at the same time seeing what emerges from this episode. So let's start by diving into the verses of the first and second presentations. I can't think of a better word than presentations. The first and second presentations of the creation, and let's start to see how different they actually are. So if we were to just piece together, let's audience participation once again, going through the 6 days of creation as they're presented in chapter 1. What comes on day 1?
Light.
Light and dark.
Creation of light and darkness. Okay. Day 2?
Heaven and earth.
Water.
Yeah.
We'll call it the firmament, the rakia, the separation of the firmaments.
Yeah.
All right, we can all join in with this. We've all got hopefully some text in front of us. Day 3?
Land and sea.
And land.
Very good.
Well, vegetation.
There you go. Plant life and trees, etc.
Number 2.
Day 4?
Sun, moon.
Sun, moon, star.
Great. We'll call that the heavenly bodies. Day 5?
Birds and
Living creatures.
Birds, animals, fish.
Fish and birds.
Fantastic. The birds and the fish. And then on day 6?
Other animals.
Animals.
You and me.
Humans.
Animals and man. So if we pay attention to this, we'll see that there's a progression, and this is discussed in our sources as well, and in our mystical sources. Everything focuses on the progression of the order of creation over here. So at the beginning, the lowest level of things that get created we call domen, which is a word meaning silent, referring to inanimate matter. Those are the first things. That's the day one, that's the day two. These are inanimate things. The next thing that we have is known as someach. Someach, which refers to the plant life, things which sprout and blossom. Then we have the third part of the progression, which is chai, which are animals, living beings. And then the fourth, finally, we have the progression of medaber. That's the final part. So that, pardon? So that's the progression of creation that we see in this presentation of creation. The creation starts with domem, it graduates to tsameach, then on to chai, and finally, with the creation of mankind, we reach the creation of medaber, speaking beings. So we would think that when we come to the second presentation, as we reach chapter 2, we would expect that it would follow along the same kind of flow. We would expect the same kind of progression. But if we actually take a look at chapter 2, then we're going to see that that's not quite what we have. So as we said, chapter 1, we have domem into tsameach, into the plant life. It's interesting because plant life does seem to have some semblance of interaction, but it's not as advanced as the way in which animals can communicate. But then on top of all of that, humanity have the ability to speak and communicate in a far more advanced and developed way than animals. But as we go into chapter 2, and over here we're going to show some of the text on the screen, let's have a look at what happens. Okay, so I'm on verse 4 in chapter 2. It's about 3/4 of the way down the page. I hope everybody can see it. Okay, let's take a look at this chapter a bit together. Eile toldot hashamayim v'haaretz b'hibaram b'yom asot Hashem Elohim eretz v'shamayim. These are the products of the heaven and the earth when they were created on the day that Hashem, God, made earth and heaven. Very interesting side point over here. Rashi says on this verse that actually everything was created on day 1 and installed in stages across these other days or across these other eras. That's just a side point, but just an interesting thing to note, that it says these are the products of the heavens and earth when they were created on the day, beyond asot. There we go. Continuing with verse 5, V'chol siach hasadeh terem yihiyeh ba'aretz. Now, all of the trees of the field were not yet on the earth. Someone was pointing this out last week. I forget who it was. V'chol esef hasadeh terem yitzmach. And all of the grass, all of the herbs of the field had not yet sprouted. Why? Ki lo himtir Hashem Elokim al haaretz. Because Hashem had not yet sent the rain on the land. V'adam ayin la'avod es ha'adamah. And there was no man yet to work the soil. So what happens? V'eid ya'alem min haaretz v'hishkais kol pnei ha'adamah. Verse 6, a mist ascends from the earth and waters the whole surface of the soil. And then, Vayitzer Hashem Elokim es ha'adam afar min ha'adamah. Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. And Hashem, God, formed the man of dust from the ground, and he blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. Cool. So, man is created in a barren landscape. If we are paying attention to these verses, man is created in a barren landscape. And we're taught that Hashem had done this in order that mankind would pray. And as a result of mankind praying, Hashem would cause everything to come out from the ground. So to fill in the blanks, right? Adam prays for things to sprout. Verse 9, Vayitzmach Hashem Elokim min ha'adamah kol eitz nechmad l'mareh v'tov l'ba'achal v'etz ha'chayim v'toch hagan v'etz hadat tov hara. Verse 9, Hashem God caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, and the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. So, in terms of our sequence, let's take a little look back on our progression. What's chapter 2? What's chapter 2 telling us the progression is?
Progression of life.
3 and 4 have switched.
Pardon me?
He switched them round because plant life trees didn't come till 5 or 6.
Right. Or put another way, Medaber seems to be number 2, right? Whatever number you want to put on it, Medaber is happening before Someach.
Yeah.
Right? That's what we seem to be seeing over here. So let's fast forward a little bit, just down to verse 18. I can't see verse 18 on the screen unless I do this. Right? Vayomer Hashem Elokim lo tov heyot ha'adam levado esen lo eze kenegdo. And Hashem God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper corresponding to him. Verse 19. Right? So Hashem is saying it's not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helper. So who does he send?
Eve.
Let's take a look. Verse 19. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim min ha'adama kol chayat hasadeh ve'et kolof hashamayim vayaveh el adam lirot ma yikra lo v'chol asher yikra lo ha'adam nefesh chayahu shmo. Verse 19. Now Hashem God had formed out of the ground every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call each one. And whatever the man called each living creature, that remained its name. And man assigns names to all of the animals, to all of the birds of the sky, and to every beast of the field. And after this process, Adam, mankind, man, has not found an Ezer Kenegdo. Oh, so Hashem notices that it's not good for man to be alone, so he's going to get him a companion, but the companion that he sends is animals. It's almost like we're saying man is lonely, so let's give him a dog. Right? That's the flow of the verses in this chapter. So, in response to man's loneliness, God is giving these animals to Adam, but the key point here is we're all out of order over here. Presentation number 1 gave us silent inanimate matter, tzomeach, chai, medaber. And over here, we're getting a completely different order. And then verse 20, he names all the animals and he still has no partner. So verse 21, finally, vayapel Hashem Elokim tardema Adam vayishan, that he puts Adam to sleep. And while he's asleep, he takes one of his sides and he fashions a woman out of his side. And that woman we call Eve, Chava. But that doesn't happen until we've had this this whole process involving the animals. And then verse 24, Al-Kain, right? Al-Kain yazov ish et aviv et imo v'davak be'ishto v'hayu levasa echad. We seem to break from the narrative to say something that is relevant to all of history, that a man shall leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife and they shall become as one flesh. It's brilliant advice, but why is it there? So there's a lot of strange things if we actually start to unpack chapter 2 and compare it and contrast it to chapter 1. With chapter 1, we saw that there was a progression. It was ascending up the ladder of creation. And in chapter 2, we see a different narrative. We see man is created, he gets lonely, then we have the animals, then we have woman, and everything is switched around. So we have to understand the meaning of this switch. And if we look at the difference as well between the first presentation in chapter 1 and the second presentation in chapter 2, we're going to see some even deeper levels of contrast as well. Henry alluded to this last week, so well done, Henry. give yourself a pat on the back. If we look at the relation, the way that we relate to Hashem himself, how does Hashem present himself in the first chapter? If you've got the texts in front of you, that's going to help you.
He creates everything.
He created everything, but how do we relate to Hashem in the first chapter? How does he present himself? With what name?
God.
Elohim, Elohim.
God.
With Elohim.
God.
We translated as God, but let's pay attention to the Hebrew word over here. The Hebrew name that he presents himself with is Elohim,
Him.
right? In chapter 2,
Hashem Elohim.
Hashem Elohim, a new name is introduced. The relationship and the interaction is somehow switching, that we go from Elohim to Hashem Elohim. That's one contrast that we have to pay attention to. Another contrast is the relationship between man and woman. How is it defined in the first chapter? So if we have a look on day 6, I don't have it on the screen for us here, but we see in chapter 1, verse 26, Vayomer Elohim Naseh Adam Etzalmeinu. Hashem says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And then we see Vayivra, verse 27, Vayivra Elohim es Adam Etzalmo B'Tselem Elohim bara oto zachar nekeva bara otam. That Hashem created man in his image, in the image of God. He created him, male and female. He created them. Vayivarech otam Elohim, and he blessed them. God blesses them. Vayomer Lahem, and he says, Peru uravu umilu es haaretz. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So in chapter 1, we have a simple, clear, direct nature of the relationship. We're creating mankind. Why? Peru uravu, for the purpose of reproduction. There's a clear, functional reason to have man and woman, and that is to reproduce. So that's how we define the relationship in the first chapter. But in the second chapter, it's far more complex, because it seems here then in the second chapter that woman is created because man is lonely, right? We have the first time in chapter 2 that the words lo tov, where is it? Lo tov, am I in the right place?
Verse 18.
Thank you. In verse 18, Vayomer Hashem Elohim lo tov. It's the first time that something is lo tov, right? It seems that the ideal situation is for man to have a union, to have a relationship, husband and wife, man and woman, right? Without it, it's a lo tov situation. And there's no mention of Peru uravu in that dimension of the relationship. Instead, what we see in chapter 2 is that the relationship is one of bonding. It's one of connection. It's of v'hayu lebasar echad, of two becoming one, as one flesh. Now, if we go back to the animals, so God realized that man is alone, and so he produced the animal kingdom, and he brings the animals to him. And then it seems that there's an interaction of some kind where Adam is naming the animals. And only after all of that, it's clear that he hasn't found what he's looking for. And it's only after that point that woman is created. Ooh. And this is borne out in, okay, I've got a lovely little slide over here, it would seem. Okay, so just to note the important points from the second presentation, that trees have not sprouted when man is created, that man is created in a barren landscape. It was not good for man to be alone, so he created the animals. He presents man with the animals, and then we pointed out our key contrasts, that there's a difference in the way that Hashem is related to, and the level of interaction. That chapter 1 seems to be a very God's eye view of the story of creation, whereas now we're seeing a more personal eye view. But let's have a look at this Midrash. Okay, so the Midrash is emphasizing this episode of Adam naming the animals. It's a long piece, but we'll try and pick out the important points. Okay, so for those who want to be able to see the Hebrew is up there at the top. And this is essentially a conversation between God and the angels, talking about how amazing mankind is. And then it goes on to talk about the naming of the animals. So says the Midrash, when he had created Adam, he makes the animals pass before him. And he said, Hashem says to Adam, what are the names of these beings? So Adam looks at these animals and he says, it's fitting to call this one an ox, to call this one a lion, right? A shor is an ox, an ari is a lion, lazeh sus, this one's going to be called a horse, V'lazeh chamor, this one's a donkey. V'lazeh gamal, this one's a camel. V'lazeh nesher, this one's an eagle. Right, as we see in the verse, Vayikra ha'adam shemot, that Adam gives them their names. So it's Adam who is naming these animals, but it's the important piece to realize is he's naming these animals based on his relationship to them. So he takes a look at a shor, and the Hebrew word that he comes up with that encapsulates the ox's essence is shor. He takes a look at a lion, and he sees that the essence of this lion is captured in the word ari. He does this with sus, with the horse, with the donkey, with the camel, with the eagle. He does it with all of these things. And what's happening is that he's interacting and having the relationship, as it were, with these animals, and based on his interaction, based on his experience, he is then giving these animals their names. And then Hashem says to him, and what about God? What is my name? And Adam said, sorry, let's go back a bit. And he says to Adam, he says, what is your name? Okay, in the third line up from the bottom of the Hebrew, what is your name? And he says, Adam. Lama, why should that be your name? Shnivrati min Adama. So Adam, with his wisdom and with his interpretation, with his understanding of the world, says, I'm going to be called Adam because I was created from the ground. So Amalei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem says to him, and Ani, Mashmi, what's my name? Well, God doesn't know his own name. So he's asking how you relate to me in terms of the relationship with Hashem and the interaction with Hashem. What name are you going to give me? So Amalei, Adam says, Hashem, Yud K, Vav K. The Hebrew letters Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. That is what Adam perceives to be the name of Hashem. Lama, Shata Adon Kol Habriot. Because you, right, Adon Shem, you are the master over all of the creations. You are the master over all of the creatures. Okay, so so his naming of God is entirely based on his relationship to him. It's all relative to him, and the same with the animals as well. So the second presentation over here is far more relative than the objective presentation in chapter 1. There's another amazing little insight over here. If we take a look back in our verses, okay, we see in chapter 2, verse 19. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim min ha'adama kol chayat hasadeh ve'et kol of hashamayim. Let me just go back a little bit for you guys, so that you can see it on the page. Where is it? Verse 19. Yeah. So Hashem created, he formed min ha'adama, from the ground, kol chayat hasadeh ve'et kol of hashamayim. All of the animals of the field and all the birds of the sky. And then in verse 20, Vayikra ha'adam, the point at which Adam is actually naming them, Vayikra ha'adam shemot lechol ha'behima, ule'of ha'shamayim, ule'chol chayat hasadeh. There's one phrase there that's added. It wasn't in verse 19, but it is in verse 20. Is anyone able to spot it?
But about the counterpart.
For the counterpart, okay, I'll do some fancy underlining over here. Let's have a go at this. Don't even know if they'll see this on YouTube or not. Okay, so God makes Chayat Hasadeh and Of Hashamayim in the first verse, and in the second verse, when Adam is naming them, L'chol HaBehema, U'la'af hashamayim, u'la'chol chayat hasadeh. There's one extra term that's used in verse 20, and it's not in verse 19. And that word is behemah.
Cattle.
Behemah. It appeared in verse 20, and it didn't appear in verse 19. Right? Now it's talking about animals, but what's the difference between a behemah and a chaya? The difference is that a behemah is the word that we give to a domesticated animal, and a chaya is the name that we give to a wild animal. But let's think about this for a second, right? If you were in the jungle, what is going to be the difference between a domesticated animal and an undomesticated animal? If you're in the wild, there's no such thing as domesticated, right? If we're able to determine that something is domesticated, it means that you're able to have a relationship with it. It's a difference between whether or not you can live with an animal. So at the point when Hashem is forming these animals, right, the only distinction is that there is wildlife or animals and birds. At the point at which Adam is naming these animals and giving an identity to these animals, it's based on his interaction. He is able to perceive which of these animals are going to be behemoths, which of these animals are going to be able to be domesticated, and which ones are not. It's an amazing, we call it in Hebrew a diuk, a little extract, a little nugget that we can pull out from the phrasing of the word. But the bottom line, guys, chapter 1 is the objective perspective. It's God's eye view, and chapter 2 is an entirely different perspective. It's a relative perspective. It's how man is relating to everything in creation. It's a very different experience, and that's how we experience things in our lives as well. There's objective realities and there's relative realities. There's a way that we perceive things, and these things are supposed to work in tandem and supposed to complement each other. It's separate experiences to the creation of man. So if you want to talk about how man relates to God, then we're going to relate to him in different ways than the God's objective view. So whereas in chapter 1, Hashem is relating to us very much from the name of Elohim. Excuse me. Oh, we're not there yet. Okay. So whereas in chapter 1, Hashem is relating from a name of Elohim, the name Elohim refers to judgment, refers to din. It is objective. That is how it is. God is creating the laws. God is creating the systems. God is creating the rules. That's all chapter 1. In chapter 2, we now have another name. We have the Yud and the Hey, and we have the Vav and the Hey. That's a name of relationship. We call that the name of Rachamim, the name of mercy, that God sees us and has mercy. He sees Adam, he is lonely, so he has mercy, and he creates the animals. It's a relational term. So man names the animals based on his experience of them, but he can't relate to them fully because he needs a human partner. He needs something that is a part of him that he can connect to. And so that is why Hashem creates Chava, fashions Chava from his side. That's why the instruction, the commandment, whatever you want to call it, is that at some point in a man's life, he is going to have to leave his father and his mother, and he's going to cling to his wife and to become as one flesh. It's about their bonding. It's about the loving relationship. So chapter 2 is much more subjective. It's much more about the relationship. Pardon me?
You muted.
I'll mute you now. So that is how we start to unravel and start to piece together chapter 2. It's interesting, by the way, I forgot to note this at the beginning, right? But chapter 1 was the objective, clearly defined viewpoint of God. And then once we get to the relative viewpoint of man and relationship, where all the trouble starts, what happens to the structure of the text? It's interesting. All of a sudden, it's not broken up. We have one long flow of text, which is also just an important observation to make as well. So,
Rabbi Nick, can I just ask a question here?
please.
It says there in chapter, in verse 24, a man shall therefore leave his father and mother and be united with his wife. Where did father and mother suddenly come into it when you've got Chava and Adam? They're the only ones who are there.
Very, very good. But this is Hashem speaking to all of history, which is why we thought it was a little strange at all that it should appear in the story and should appear here. But that is not just speaking to Adam HaRishon. That is talking to all of mankind. It is going to be part of the process for all of history now that man is going to need to find that relationship. So that is a commandment, as it were, that exists for all subsequent generations, and not just for Adam HaRishon. But it's a good observation. Okay, so then we have, right, we've got man and woman, and they've been created. We're now in this subjective world of mankind, that is, and relationship, where everything has the potential to fall apart. And straight after this, we have verse 25. Verse 25, where we say, "Vayihiyu shnehem arumim ha'adam ve'ishto v'lo yitboshashu." Verse 25, they were naked and they were not embarrassed. And Chazal point out from here that it's not just that they were naked, but Chazal point out that they were bonding. They were involved in a physical relationship. And the very next thing that happens is V'hanachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh. And the serpent was arum, right? We just used the word in the previous verse that they were both naked. V'hanachash haya arum, and the nachash was the most naked, although we translate it as cunning. But here is the important point to take note of with this particular transition. Okay, now don't pay too much attention to the fact that we switched from chapter 2 to chapter 3. Let's just pay attention to the fact that we have one body of text, okay, where we have had Adam feeling lonely, so Hashem has created the animals and he's named them all, and that wasn't enough. He hasn't reached a point of connection, so Hashem has fashioned a woman, and they have now had, as Chazal say in verse 25, they have now had a physical relationship. And somehow the very next thing that the Torah wants to tell us about is the appearance of the Nachash. Somehow this physical relationship between Adam and Chava brings about the Nachash. The Nachash didn't appear in chapter 1. He had no role in chapter 1. But now that we are opening up a whole new landscape, a whole new level, where we're seeing the subjective world of man, we're seeing the tremendous possibilities that exist on both sides. We're able to relate in a healthy, productive, altruistic way, but we're also opening up the potential for things to happen from a place of negativity, of ra, of evil, and ta'ava, and desire, and selfishness. So it seems that this point of the physical relationship is not giving birth, but it's sprouting the scenario with the serpent. Right, the struggle with the serpent, which is all rooted in ta'ava, in desire, and it's all rooted in ra, and it's all rooted in selfishness. That is what is coming out at this point in the story, in this point in the second presentation of creation. We're seeing the essential struggle in all of humanity, the pull between selfishness and the pull the other way to selflessness. Right? The second presentation opens all of that up we are open now to both possibilities. And as a result of this episode, man eats from the tree, something goes wrong. Why? Because we are coming from an imperfect, subjective perspective. We're coming from the point of relationship. It's no longer the realm of the objective, as we saw in chapter 1. The very nature of chapter 2, which is all about the subjective, all about the relative, all about the relationship, means that we are now exposed to a struggle. The struggle between selflessness and the struggle of selfishness. And the episode, as we see it in the Torah, it leads them to eat from the tree. Okay? And we have to understand what is happening with the Eitz Hadas Tov Vara. Okay? If we've all read through the parasha, but to summarize, the serpent manages to convince them, manages to trick them to be able to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad. But the decision is bigger than the sum of its parts. What do I mean? We have to understand conceptually, more broadly, what is happening in this episode. It's not just about what was man thinking when he made this decision. There is something bigger. There's a bigger piece. There's a bigger picture. Oh, look at that we have to think about before we actually get into the rationale, before we actually get into what was driving Adam and Chava at this time. So we have to understand, therefore, the terms that we are using, right? Adam and Chava are eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Vara. And before we get into anything else, we have to understand what that means. Because once man eats from the fruit, it defines the world that we enter into after the Chet. We are still living in the post-Chet Adam Harishon world. We are still living in the world that exists as a result of this mistake, of the sin, of the error, of the transgression of Adam Harishon eating from the tree of Das Tov Vara. So let's start to consider, what is Das? Does anybody want to have a guess at how we would understand the word Das, Da'at? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Knowledge.
Knowledge. Thank you very much. So Das we usually translate as knowledge. But what we're going to see is that in Judaism we actually have three, did it again, spoiler alert, right? We actually have three levels of knowledge. Let's explore them together. The first is called Chokhmah. That is the lowest level of knowledge. We then have Bina, the second level of knowledge. And then finally, we have the level of Das, of Da'at, okay, which we translate as knowledge. But it's crucial for us to understand why the Torah chooses the word Da'at. It didn't use the word Chachma, it didn't use the word Bina, it's called it the Eitz Hadat Tov Vara. Okay, so Chachma, on the simplest level, Chachma, we traditionally would call this information, call it wisdom, information. We all exist at the level of Chachma. We hear things, we absorb, we take things in, we see things. The way in which we interact with the world in a superficial basis, that is what we call Chachma. That's the initial level. But then there's one step further, and that's the realm of Bina. That's the level of Bina. Bina, which shares the root of the word lahavin, which means to build. So Bina is where you don't just see information and hear information, you start to digest the information, you start to understand, you start to compare it and contrast it with other things that you already have in your mind. You start to construct a structure that is comprised of all of these different scattered bits of Chachma. We are thinking, we are processing, we are analyzing, we are digesting, we are going through the process of computing the information, trying to understand it. That's the next level up from Chachma, right? What what physical system does that parallel with? Something that we do each and every single day. Give you a clue.
Right.
Eat.
Oh, you said it. Thank you, Martin. Right? It parallels, in a way, the way that we eat. We put things in our mouths, and then our body starts to digest that food. In a similar vein, we take in information around us, and then we start to digest it. We start to process it. We start to compute it. So that is, from a food level, it's going from chokhmah to bina, to the digestion. But in the scope of thought as well, that's how this information, that's how this knowledge starts to process. We take it in, but then we digest it, we process it, we start to build a picture in our mind. Okay, the third part is das, right? In the food digestive analogy, that is where we start to benefit from the nutrients. We've digested it, and now our body becomes one with that food. We start to benefit from the digested food, and the nutrients spread throughout our body, and you now can't discern, you can't tell apart where the food ends and the person begins. It is one entity. We have absorbed it, we have digested it, and now it is part of us. So das, in the knowledge analogy, is when the information now becomes part of us, right? Eitz hadas tov v'ra. The level of knowledge that we call das is where we have ingested it, digested it, processed it to such a point that that now forms part of our identity. We are one with that knowledge that we have processed. We see this verb in Parashat Bereishit, in chapter 4. V'ha'adam yada es chava ishto. Right? We haven't got there yet, but v'ha'adam yada, and man knew his wife Eve. What does it mean that he knew her, that he had this knowledge? It's not just that he met her and remembered her name and they were able to have a conversation. Okay, this verse is describing to us the physical relationship that they have together, the offspring of which is Cain, is their child Cain. So das, in Jewish thought, is the point of connection. It's the point where you become one. Right? I hope I'm saying this clearly. So the process of das, the level of das, is the complete bonding. It's the union of two things becoming one. That's why it's the word that we use for Adam and Eve becoming one, right? Which leads to the birth of Cain. But on the level of knowledge, it's when the knowledge becomes so much a part of me that myself and the knowledge are inseparable. We can't discern the two anymore. It's when you see something so deeply that you can't be separated from it. It's your worldview. It's the knowledge, and it's part of who you are, right? In the same way that food becomes part of who we are. So what is das tov v'ra? Right? The tree of knowledge, tov v'ra, good and evil. So there are two options. There's good and there is evil. And what we are going to understand from this is I have the capacity to bond and to connect and to become one with Ra, or I have the capacity to bond and to connect and to become one with Tov. I can have the das of Ra, or I could have the das of Tov. I can attach to one of these two extremes, and that didn't exist before the sin. Right? Das Tov Vara is a state of being when you can fully connect and identify with one of those parts, either with the part of Tov, which is the good, it's the altruistic side of us, or I could do the same with Ra, which is the selfishness, the desire, the evil, the egocentricity. And this is what we experience inside of ourselves. When I do something good, it's a result of something inside me that did it. And that's the same when I do something bad. If I do something good, I don't disassociate myself from that action and say, oh, that was some other part of me that did it. We experience the doing of good as coming from ourselves. And in the same way, when we do something bad, we feel the pain, we feel the regret. It's not separate to us, right? I was the one that ate that cake. I was the one that did that bad thing, right? Our lives exist with these two sides, right? And how do I have those two sides? That's because of the achila. That's because of the eating, right? To eat means that I take something which is external to me, and now I bring it into myself, and it literally becomes a part of myself. I eat food, I digest that food, it becomes a part of me. So in this conceptual way, eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Vara means that with the eating of this fruit, we bring inside of humanity for the rest of history, right? This is the starting point for the rest of history. We're bringing inside the capacity to have a Das Tov and a Das Ra, to be able to fully bond with good or to be able to fully bond with Ra. It becomes a part of who I am. Until that point, Tov and Ra existed externally of mankind. But with Adam eating from the tree, it becomes a part of who he is. And as a result of that, it becomes a part of who we are. It means that we now have the capacity to make Tov part of us or to make the Ra part of me. They're both legitimate sides that exist, right? So yes, there is a sin. There's Chet Adam Arishon. Adam falls. There's the downfall as a result of the mistake that he makes. But let's not underplay what is actually happening in the Torah at this point, right? By eating, by digesting the Eitz Hadas Tov Vara, there is now a new reality that didn't exist before. The potential for Tov, the potential for Ra, the potential to become attached to good, and the potential to become attached to Ra. So what is being created on day 6 is the capacity that we didn't have before they ate from the tree. And that is, let's put a name to this capacity now.
Free will.
Thank you very much. That's the final piece that gets created before we go out into the rest of history, right? I need the capacity to have a pull between Ra and Tov, between the Das Ra and the Das Tov. I need to be able to choose between the two. Bechira Chofshit, which is the Hebrew name, the Hebrew term that we give to free will, that is the essential element that defines humanity, and it is the final component of humanity that is created in the 6 days of creation. That's why it's in the 6 days of creation. We are creating. Adam creates free will by eating from this tree, by ingesting, digesting, becoming one with Tov and Ra. And so when mankind is sent out of the Garden of Eden, mankind is sent out of the Garden of Eden with free will, right? And now that we leave the Garden of Eden, we enter into the world, into Olam Hazeh, in a world where we need to make our own choices. That is how we have the potential to lead a meaningful life. A world without choices is meaningless. But now that we have the capacity to make choices, so now history can begin. It didn't begin with man, with Hashem putting man into the Garden of Eden. It begins with man being sent out of the Garden of Eden with Bechira Chofshit, with free will. To highlight this point, something that we mentioned a couple of weeks ago in our first session, we said that the Torah is bookended, yeah? We said that it starts with Bereishit, with the creation of heaven and earth, and we said that it ends with Ha'azinu, Hashamayim Va'adabeira, okay? If we have a look, if we go to the end of the Torah, Okay, and we have a look at one of the final things, one of the last things that that Moshe tells the Jewish people. One of the final things we're at the end of the Torah. What are you going to say to the Jewish people? Says Moshe Rabbeinu, Re'ei natati lefanecha hayom et ha'chaim ve'et hatov ve'et hamavet ve'et hara. Ha'azinu, which was wrapping up the flow of history, the flow of humanity, the way the world will play out over the thousands of years that we talked about last week. See, I have placed before you today life and good, and death and evil. Fast forward a couple of verses. Uvacharta b'chayim leman tichye ata v'zarecha. Choose life, choose chayim, choose tov, so that you and your offspring shall live. The fundamental choice between life and good and death and bad, and Moshe begs us to choose life. Life is lived in the context of choice. It's the free will, it's the bechira between Tov and Ra that started off human history, right? With the eating of the Eitz Hadas, and it's Uvacharta b'chayim, which allows us to conclude the Torah, and in, so to speak, concluding history as well. It's the goal. It's what gives life meaning. It came at a price. We can't ignore the fact that it comes at a price. We have to live with the Yetzer Hara. We live with the capacity to be destructive, to be selfish, to choose Ra. That is a distinct possibility that exists now for mankind as a result of Adam's choice. And we'll see as we go through Bereishit and as we go through Noach, we're going to see that people keep choosing Ra. It's an equal possibility, but as we'll see, they keep choosing Ra. Fundamentally, life becomes meaningful because we can make it or break it with our choices. We can choose to be tzaddikim, we can choose to be holy, we can choose to be good, we can choose to bring our light to the world, or we can choose to be rashayim, we can choose to do bad, to bring darkness and evil to the world. The Torah challenges us to choose life. That's ultimately what we have to do, and please God, we will. We will choose life, we will choose good. That's our avodah in this world, the constant friction and tension of choice between good and bad. And every time that we choose good, it brings us one step closer to Hashem. It brings us one step closer to that point in history where we were in Gan Eden, where we were surrounded by all of that amazingness. And that becomes our life's challenge now, to always try and choose good and not to choose the bad. There's loads more that we still need to dive into next week with this topic. That just helps us scratch the surface a little bit. But fundamentally, what we've said is that we had two presentations. We had the objective presentation in chapter 1 of God's viewpoint, the Elokim, the din, the literal cause and effect, as it were, of everything that Hashem created. And the second presentation we see is far more relative, far more subjective, based on the relationship. And what that did is it opened the door for the capacity to fall and to fail. Not all parts of building relationships can work out for the best. So we open the door for those mistakes. The physical relationship between Adam and Chava somehow brings about the scenario, the episode with the Nachash, the fact that they eat from the tree of knowledge, good and bad. That now means that the tension of choice, the free will, now exists for mankind. And we'll pick it up next week and explore this much further. So we're going to that's it. That's the end of the slideshow.
Yeah.
So we're going to take comments and I'm going to take questions now. If I can, just to point out one thing, which is a lot of you are still waiting for your Tanakhs to come in from Divrei Kodesh. They told me today that they are in the country and they're hoping that they will be in the shop tomorrow. I will let you all know once we've got them in. For all those watching on YouTube, we'll keep the recording going, but that's officially the end, so to speak, of the presentation. But let's pause for questions and comments from you guys.
Can I just say
Rabbi?
something about Divrei Kodesh? I was in there today and
Yeah.
I ordered something else. So when they phoned me to tell me that the Tanakh's in, I'm very happy to pick up for anybody if they want and bring them back to Bushy.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Rabbi Nick?
Yeah.
So, very nice share, thank you very much. You explained that when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of good and evil, that was the point where they gained free will.
That's right.
Prior to that, Adam had to make choices, and Eve, without having free will. They had no moral compass at that stage. Why is it equitable for them to be punished when they're making a judgment without any moral compass?
That's a good question, David. And please God, next week we'll be able to explore that a little bit as well.
Yeah, because that was my issue. I've always had an issue with this, in that Hashem put that tree there. It's like saying to a child, you know and I know, that if you say to a child, you can have that, but you can't have that, the minute you turn your back, the child wants to explore the thing you told him he couldn't have or she couldn't have. And I've always found that it's a difficult issue. And the other issue I have is Hashem created animals, male and female. Why didn't he create man, male and female at the same time? It just seems, I've never been able to explain to myself why
He did. He created them both at the same time as a generic male and female, all in one.
Well, the story doesn't tell like that.
It does. It uses the word Adam at the beginning, and that word is generic.
If we have a look in chapter 1, where it said, "Let us make man in our image."
Yeah.
And we said it.
Well, Hashem hasn't got male and female.
How do you know?
Well, Hashem is not physical.
No, so
it's his soul that you.
But the way in which we relate to him is.
Yeah, I understand that, but that's what I'm saying. He created man in his own image.
Mm-hmm.
And the story goes on to say, and I saw that man was lonely. And
it said in verse 27, Zachar unakeva bara otam. He created him, male and female, he created them. And I mean, there's lots to say on this about how, I think it's probably Midrashim which talk about how Adam and Chava were created as one entity and they were back to back, and then Hashem splits them off. There's all kinds of fascinating things to explore. But fundamentally, whatever it means, it would seem that they were created as one entity, and that was insufficient. And that's the point that we get to in chapter 2. It was not good for man to be alone.
Yeah, he didn't
So
create animals.
He sends Adam the animals, and that didn't do the trick either.
Yeah.
So that's what leads to fashioning Chava from his side, whatever that means, and creating the distinct entity that was woman that became his partner. Joy, do you have a question there?
Yeah, actually I've got two. One, he created.
Second one you have to pay for.
He wanted the Adam wanted a helper, and Hashem sent all the animals, but surely he knew that actually what Adam wanted was a companion, Chava. So why didn't he send Chava first before the animals?
That is a wonderful question. I mean, he knows everything that's going on, doesn't he, really? We could ask that on every single verse in the Torah. Why did he do it like this? Why did he do it like that? It seems that the naming of these animals was a process that had to happen, right? It's not that Hashem tells Adam, this is a donkey, this is a camel, this is a horse. It seems that there is a level of intuition, of wisdom, which Adam is displaying. And one of the things that we didn't talk so much about 2 weeks ago, but Chazal do talk about it, is Adam's not just this, immature child. He possesses the deepest wisdom. He has an awareness of reality and an awareness of Hashem that we can't even comprehend. There are sources that talk about how I can't remember what it is, but the glow of Adam Harishon, even after his passing, that there's a depth to Adam Harishon which we haven't really talked about, but which Chazal do describe. That this was somebody who could, Chazal described him as being able to see from one side of the world to the other. Right? He had a depth of perception and a level of perception that we can't relate to. And it was this depth of perception and the wisdom that he had, which enabled him to be able to identify the essence of these animals. He's not just looking and saying, oh, that's a horse, oh, that's a dog. He's looking at their essence of what these animals represent and naming them from that. One of my favorites is Kelev. Rabbi Tatz always talks about Kelev because the name Kelev refers to the word lev, which is the heart, and dogs are so loving and so able to forge, or humans are able to forge a close relationship with dogs, and so that's built into the essence of the animal. And Adam is the one, as the Midrash tells us, Adam is the one who reveals that. Adam is the one who now defines that is Kelev. That doesn't come from Hashem, that comes from Adam. So the naming of the animals seems like it's a necessary prerequisite to how history plays out, to the whole shaping of reality. So the outcome of it, Hashem would have known. Yeah, of course, it's not going to be enough, we assume, right? But it seems like that was still a necessary journey that Adam needed to go on. But beautiful. What's your second question?
It was just one thing that is revealed or happens is that they will die. They will be mortal, and we haven't touched on that.
Oh, we got so much that we haven't touched on, John.
Okay.
Got so much we haven't touched on. But yeah, that's let's see how we do next week. I can't remember everything that we talk. Can't remember everything that we go through next week, but let's give it one more week, and see what happens. Lee, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to say that whole immortality and time span, when you're taught it when you're very little, you just think, oh yes, Eve was there, she sinned, she ate of the tree of knowledge, and that was that. But they could have been there for a very, very long time. They could have been living there, formed their relationship, and it is implied that they had formed a lasting relationship, which doesn't happen overnight either. So actually, it wasn't the fact that they were just, yes, I'm going to eat it. And even Eve's answer, there's all these trees I can eat of. When the serpent comes to her and says, eat off that tree, she says, is there any tree that you can't eat of? She doesn't say, yes, there is. She says, look at all those trees I can eat of already. So they could have been there. When you look about a little child, sometimes if you put something in front of a child and say, leave it for a bit, they can wait a bit, but not for a very long time. So I think that's really key.
But as was pointed out before, though, we are giving examples of things like putting something in front of a child. We have to remember our only frame of reference is post creation of Bechira Chofshit, of post free will. That's the only frame of reference that we have. But whatever was happening with Adam and Eve is not existing in the same framework. That's
So did they have free will?
Do you mean at the point of when they made the decision?
Before they made that decision, did they have, before they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, did they have free will?
It would seem that free will is something that gets created as a result of eating the tree.
So prior to that,
we still have to understand what they were, what was causing them to make the decision. We still have to understand what that process was.
Yes.
But the internalization that creates the tension and the friction within us of good and evil, that is now happening.
Absolutely. I just don't understand what happened beforehand. Why they ate.
I'll see you next week, David, and let's see if we can start to understand that together a bit. all I can say is I really hope that next week's topic covers all of this. So we'll find out next week. Lovely. I'm going to turn off the recording now. To everyone watching on YouTube, we will see you next week. Have a wonderful and
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.